thinking about the company's future growth?
So the way I describe this to the outside world is that we are the best or even the only company in the world that solves the email deliverability problem. But that up until a year ago, we solved that problem for one specific set of companies, which is large US-based marketers or marketers and publishers. I think you can think about the growth of the company in the future as changing all three of those vectors and broadening it out. So instead of just going after US companies, we're now going after US and European companies. Within a year or two, we'll have people in Asia Pacific and Latin America as well, but now we have a team in Western Europe, and Western Europe is going to produce, I don't know, 8 to 10% of the company's revenue this year. So that's one vector, is adding international. The second is not just going after large enterprises, but going after small businesses as well. And later this month, we're going to be launching a new product line that has a completely different name associated with it that internally we've been calling our Express product. And that's basically just going to produce a small business, completely automated, e-commerce oriented platform for companies that need our services but can't afford our current pricing, and where it's unprofitable for us to serve those customers the way we serve larger customers. And then finally, the other way we think about the company's growth is that moving away from just serving marketers and publishers to serving anyone who's got an email server, whether it's a corporate email server that handles individuals' mail, whether it's an ISP trying to figure out how to keep their servers safe and secure and whitelisted. There are lots of different types of email servers in the world besides marketing. So those are kind of the three vectors that we're growing along, and I think each one of them expands the size of our market 3 to 5x. And when you compound it and you put them all together, that gives us a much, much bigger world that we're playing in.
How about a fun remember when return path story?
So, 10 years is a long time. There have been a lot of great stories. I know you heard at least a couple of them on some of the other interviews. But for me, I'll tell you one of the most poignant moments was about 2 years ago. So the company was probably 8 years old, maybe 7 years old. I did my first trip through Asia Pacific with our head of international. And among other meetings we did while we were over there for a couple weeks, we did a meeting in Beijing with every ISP in China. So we invited them all, they all came to Beijing for this meeting. So we were doing a single presentation, and not one of them spoke English, not a word of English. So the presentation was translated into Cantonese or Mandarin, I forget. And I actually had a translator there as well. So the slides were in a language I couldn't read, and as I was speaking, every sentence was being translated. And I got to the end of it feeling a little bit awkward, like I couldn't really interact with the audience the way I usually do when I speak. And they started asking questions. And the questions they were asking made it very clear to me that they knew who ReturnPath was, that they knew we were the global market leader in what we do, and that, in fact, they were very, very familiar with a lot of the details of our products and our programs. And that was just such an incredible moment for me. It was like, wow, I'm standing here a world away in a language I don't speak, and I'm speaking to a room full of people that know who I am and that know who my business is. And for a company that's still reasonably small and very focused on its North American roots, that was just such a great moment of pride for me and for the whole company.
Very cool. What about the name Return Path? Where does that come from?
That's a much longer story, and we can save that for a time with more time, and I can explain how the monkey is the company's mascot as well, because those two things are closely related. But the short answer is that the name Return Path actually came from Jack, our CFO and COO, and we had hired a naming consultant, we just spent all this time and money and cycles trying to figure out the perfect name for the company. We hated everything the consultant came up with. And one day Jack was looking down at the header of an email. He had printed out an email. And the first 2 words of every header on an email are return path. And he just circled them. I remember, never forget it. He circled them on the page and held it up to the group and said, why don't we just call it this?
Very cool. Tell me a little bit about your life outside of work.
I have no life outside of work. No, I'm just kidding. I actually have a great life outside of work. I live just outside of New York City. I lived in the city for about 17 years, and my wife and I just moved outside the city a few months ago because we just had our third baby in a very, very short period of time. So we have 3 under the age of 2.5. So we're very busy at home, but great. We have great kids. They're just so much fun, and they've completely changed life, but they're a tremendous amount of fun.
And what about travel? I understand you like to travel.
I do. Well, I've always done a lot of business travel, and before we started having kids, Marakita and I used to do a lot of fun and kind of far-flung personal travel. I think that's probably on hold for quite a while at this point, but we did some really interesting trips over the years. I think probably the most interesting one, or at least the most unique one, was we spent 2 weeks on Antarctica about 7 years ago, and just camping on the glaciers on the 7th continent, and it was just a absolutely fascinating place. It sort of reminded me, I shouldn't say reminded, it felt to me like it would feel if you went to the moon on vacation. It was just sort of that different kind of place.
And tell me a little bit about things that you still want to do, a couple things on your bucket list.
Besides taking the company public and selling it for $1 billion. So, the things that are on my bucket list are mostly physical things. For me, those are sort of the biggest challenges. I've run a couple of marathons, although not particularly well, but I've finished them, and I'd love to do a triathlon at some point. That's pretty high on the list. I really enjoy hiking, and there are probably a couple of hiking things I would have on the list. I'd love to hike the Appalachian Trail sometime when I have 3 or 4 months or 5 months to spend, and would love to climb one of the tallest peaks in the world. Probably not Everest, because that seems like just a terrible, terrible thing to do to your body, but at least one of the big ones on some continent somewhere.
Great. Thanks a lot.
Absolutely. Go return path.